Hello, 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 hello. Hi, guys. Another day, another live. I'm going to be painting my nails this time again, like I did that one time at band camp. This beautiful color. It's called Positive Vibes Only, which is ironic considering that today the thing I'm sharing about is working with your shadow. So let me go ahead and just add a hello to the chat. All right, so hope you guys are doing well. So again, don't mind me if I do end up looking down at different points, doing my nails today, having some quiet time without the dogs to mess them up. So what I wanted to talk about today is shadow work, something that is definitely talked about a lot in the spiritual community. But again, I just wanted to share something I realized last night into today. I was watching an interview yesterday with this man named Jordan Peterson. And it was like a two-part interview. And in one of the parts, he was talking about basically, your dark side, your shadow side, and how oftentimes as humans kind of act like we could never do something as bad as someone else, and he used extreme examples like the Holocaust and things like that, and saying how, us humans now, we look back on history, not realizing that history is built into our DNA and that we can repeat the same things that have happened in history and that we're fully capable of doing a lot of damage. And then oftentimes we don't want to face that. We don't want to accept that. We only want to essentially like highlight the good parts of ourselves. And it made me think of stuff like social media and Instagram and how we always want to show the good sides of ourselves. And what it really made me think about is how much we try to suppress like any kind of negativity. And so the whole just like positive thinking movement, positive thoughts, positive vibes, I really think has kind of messed us up a little bit if you've gotten really deep into that, because it's not just about light work and being the light. It's also accepting that you are a dual being, and you do have a dark side. And a lot of times when you try to suppress or hide that dark side instead of embracing and accepting it, you end up, it almost creates like a split mind. And like one of the quotes this man, Jordan Peterson, used in this interview was, that the quote that a divided house will not stand, it's easily conquered. And it's the same thing in psychology. The house represents the mind. And so if your mind is divided, like how do you expect to level up? How do you expect to move forward in life? You can't, because you're going to basically have almost like a bipolar personality in a sense, where one minute you're this way, the next minute you're this way, and almost like having two sides of yourself. And it brings me to that idea too of having the angel and the devil on your shoulders, and having them kind of get in your ear and try to get you to do certain things. And so that's one side of you is the angel, and the other side of you is the little devil. And so personally, for me, I know that there have been many, many times where I am trying so hard to be seen as perfect, right? A lot of us, I feel, do this, especially if you've dealt with any kind of rejection or just not feeling accepted by others. We tend to want to put on a face of perfection. And what happens is you stop yourself from being able to accept the darker parts of you. And so, like, for example, say you get, like, it's almost like you're bottling things up. You know how they say, like, don't bottle up your emotions. So when you're bottling up or suppressing that more darker side of your nature, you're essentially bottling it up. And what happens is there's a whole bunch of pressure that builds. And so you'll have a day where somebody could just say the wrong thing to you. They could just look at you the wrong way. Somebody could cut you off on the road. I mean, it could be something really just minuscule, like tiny, doesn't even make a difference. And you explode. and you explode to the point where you're like, oh my God, I don't know where that came from. That's not me. Or you've got me acting out of pocket or acting out of character. Where does that come from? You know, that whole idea of acting out of character or acting out of pocket is like, oh, this isn't who you are, right? Because again, remember, you're suppressing that side. And so the more angry that side gets, the more explosive it gets. It comes to the point where you can't control it and it has to be released. It's like trying to keep steam from escaping a boiling pot. There's no way you can do it. Eventually, it's going to create so much steam, so much pressure that the top is going to go flying off. Um, unless you have like a pressure cooker, right, where the top literally has to be locked down. But even still, at some point, you have to release that steam in order to get your food if you have a pressure cooker. I love my pressure cooker. I use it like daily. But anyways, so it caused me to, just listening to this interview last night really caused me to look back on my experiences over the last few months. And even like, I would say getting like, so I always talk about my dogs, but my dogs have been a huge catalyst for me to make change in my life, or to be actually just be willing to accept myself. There have been so many situations where we've been outside and they do something, they're dogs, so they're gonna, get excited, they're gonna bark at people, they're gonna jump on people, they're puppies, or they get excited because they see another dog and they start taking off and trying to pull you down the freaking sidewalk and stuff. And I tell you, there were so many times where I would just lose my cool. And I would be like, oh my God, I can't believe like I let myself lose my cool in front of a bunch of people outside. Meanwhile people are like, oh, it's okay. And I'm like, no, it's not okay. And I'd be really upset. And what I noticed, especially looking back, is that oftentimes what they were doing, what my dogs were doing was nothing serious at all. But what would happen is that I would basically, every time they would do something that would irritate me, I would suppress it. Again, and this is like that dark side, that shadow side of you, getting frustrated, getting upset, feeling like they don't respect you, right? These are the things that are going in my head as a dog owner. They're humiliating me, they're embarrassing me. Like, why are they being like this? Why can't they just be perfect, right? Why can't they just be positive, good puppies all the time? And I would suppress it and I would be like, no, you know what? We're not going to feel that. We're not going to feel that. We're not going to feel that. And weeks would go by, maybe like 2 to 3 weeks. I noticed that that's kind of like a cycle for me, or a trend, right? If you had a graph that would show you, it would be like, she's chill, she's chill, she's chill, she's chill. And then as soon as like 3 weeks hit, it's like, boom, you know, frustration, anger, everything come bubbling to the surface. And there was one day where I had, and even to be honest, even when I would get really frustrated and like explode in a sense, I would try to kind of suppress that explosion and be like, no, 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 gotta chill down. We've got to chill down. It's not that serious. Because again, you have this whole idea that everything you think and everything you say and stuff gets put out into the universe and it comes right back at you. And that, in a sense, can create fear in you to not explore your darker side and not face it, because it's kind of like, well, if I put energy towards it, aren't I going to manifest that? And the answer to me is no. I mean, I know we have that saying, where your energy goes, something, or where your, I don't know where it is, but I don't remember the exact saying, but kind of like, where your focus goes, your energy goes. That's what it is. Where your focus goes, your energy goes. Where your energy goes, basically that's what gets created, right? But I had to come to a point in my life where I'm like, no, that can't be like 1000% how it works, because there's been so many times where I've been frustrated, and you're able to work through that frustration because you actually face it instead of trying to ignore it and bottle it up, and you're able to create change. So that's why, like, in the description of the video, I was talking about how there's a sweet spot, because essentially there's this sweet spot where, when you're willing to face and embrace your shadow side or your dark side, or just the other side of you that's holding all that pain and anger and frustration and whatever, when you're willing to face it and basically see it as your equal because it is part of you, and seeing it as you're here for a reason, let me embrace you rather than try to suppress you. It's like treating it like it's the stepchild and locking it away in the dungeon and saying that it can't come out because it'll embarrass you or it's bad. When in reality it's just the hurt child. It's the hurt part of your inner child, right? And you're basically saying, no, 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 we can't let you out, you're bad, when in reality, again, it's not. And when you're willing to face and embrace that part of you, that's the sweet spot where you're able to actually heal, and you're able to let go of those darker parts in that sense and understand those darker parts. But again, you can't let it go until you understand it or until you accept it. And that's a hard thing, I think, for a lot of us to do, because to say that you have so much anger towards a person or towards your dogs or towards whatever situation, to say you have so much anger that you feel a certain way oftentimes will make you feel like you're weak or make you feel like you're just ugly. Like, how could I have such feelings towards someone when they've done so much for me or when they've done nothing wrong or blah, 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 blah. But it's not about saying, it's not about justification. It's not about blame. It's not about guilt. It's not about any of that. It's just saying, hey, I felt this way, or I feel this way, and I have a right to feel this way. And once you kind of hit that point, you're able to look into the story behind it. You're able to look into, well, why did I feel that way? How was I perceiving the situation, that caused me to feel that way? And where did that perception come from? And when you start, that's the shadow work, right? That's what I consider the shadow work. It's accepting that darker side of you that you do have, those tendencies, whether it's to be manipulative or petty or angry or frustrated or fearful or whatever, right? It's again the other side of that balance. You're accepting that part of you. It's a beautiful thing to accept that, yeah, I get angry at my dogs sometimes. Sometimes I feel embarrassed when they pull me. Well, why do I feel embarrassed when they pull me? Because it feels like I have no control. And then, you start going down like this rabbit hole of asking yourself those questions so you can get to the root, And it's kind of like, okay, well, I feel embarrassed when my dogs pull me down the sidewalk because I feel like I don't have any control of my dogs. And it makes me look weak. It makes me look like a weak female because a lot of people see females as weak beings. And, again, the list goes on. And then you start to say, well, when I was a kid, this happened, or I felt this. You start to ask yourself, how long have I felt this way? And you'd be surprised how long you may be holding on to different beliefs and feelings. And, it just starts to, it just builds up. The more you try to suppress that stuff, it's just going to build up and it's going to literally create its own entity. And at that point, you have no control over it at all. No control, But when you can understand something, you've taken your power back in that sense. Because say you do get triggered and somebody does something and, you're able to, it's like somebody does something or you experience something and you're able to become aware of what's going on within your mind. Like you're able to see, oh my gosh, I'm telling myself that story again. And it's causing me to feel this way. But that comes from you first being able to accept and understand. Because if you don't even look at the dark side of you, if you refuse to look at it, you're never going to be able to understand it and understand where that side of you is coming from and why it's there. But when you become aware in that moment, and you have more moments where you're just aware. You're aware that, oh, I'm upset in this moment because of this, and I know it stems from this. And in that moment, you're able to make a decision. It's like, think about like if you have a child and you know that your child tends to get angry when certain situations occur. And you've taken the time to accept that your child has outbursts. Like say your child gets upset when they want a lollipop in the grocery store and you say no. And they have a full-on like explosion in the store, a full tantrum. And over time, instead of spanking the kid or smacking them or telling them to shut up and or what was it that parents used to say? Let me give you something to cry about. Like instead of going that route and trying to throw the bad kid in the dungeon, it's essentially saying, let me accept you where you are right now. You're hurting, you're upset, and let me try to understand you. Let's work through those feelings. And so the next time that, say, something was to happen where they don't get their way and they have a tantrum, you're able to understand, okay, they're having a tantrum because they feel like they're not in control, or they feel like they're not being listened to, or whatever the root, thing is for that child. And so in that sense, you're able to say, hey, how about instead of responding this way, you can respond in another way. That's just like a simple analogy in a sense. Like, because again, you have to remember this is your inner child. Because most of us have not truly spiritually or mentally or emotionally aged past the age of 7. So we're all still these little hurt children walking around. And again, if you can kind of sit down with yourself and accept that you do have these tendencies to have temper tantrums, and figuring out why these temper tantrums happen in the first place, that's the sweet spot. That's the spot where you're able to actually create growth and healing and change in your life. But until you're willing to accept that that is a part of who you are and embrace it, you're going to be stuck in the same situation where every 2 or 3 weeks, your emotions can no longer be suppressed and you act out and you throw a tantrum. This is such a pretty color. So yeah, I mean, it just watching that last night and, watching that interview last night and being like, man, I never really thought about it that way. And me looking back again into my own experience and saying, well, that would explain why, like, I would always say that I was that person who bottles up their feelings. And realizing that that doesn't serve you at all, bottling up those feelings and trying to suppress it and make it seem like you don't care because, oh, crying in public is a sign of weakness. Don't cry in public, or don't cry in front of anybody, or don't show your emotions. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve. Don't let people know that they've essentially got under your skin. And it's just like, that's more damage to you than anything. Because then you don't allow yourself to feel. And I'm not saying that means go have a tantrum every time something happens and you feel the need to riot or whatever. You can riot in quiet. Like, you can go into your own space and take care of yourself in that way. But you have to deal with it. You have to. Because again, otherwise it becomes its own entity, it becomes its own being with its own mind. And that is essentially what we've created. That's why people look at the ego as such a negative thing. Like, the ego is you. It's not a negative thing at all. It's just the part of you you don't want to face. You think that you're just spirit. You're not just spirit. Please, you can pass me with that bullshit. You are not just light and love and all of that stuff. But you're not just darkness either. And I think something else that I tend to see that happens is that people they'll go to the extremes, which, everybody has their own journey. So I guess for some of us, we do have to do that. Reminds me of when I had this channel named Finding Our Middle, and it was about, bouncing kind of from extreme to extreme till you kind of find your center. And sometimes that's necessary, but I do notice too that you have people who either go to the extreme and just focus on being light beings and light workers and light this and light that. And then you have people who go to the other side and just dark magic, and I'm darkness, and I do my work in the dark and blah, 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 blah. And I think it's about both, like, you're both light and dark. And it's just that a lot of us tend to ignore the dark side. I mean, it makes you think of like Star Wars and stuff, right? How you have the Jedi who are supposed to be like the light workers, and then you have the dark side, come to the dark side with Darth Vader and stuff. And the red versus the blue. I mean, that brings me back to all of the occult stuff that I used to study, and just realizing that it was always about duality. It was always about good versus bad, red versus blue, light versus dark, you know, heaven versus hell, whatever, Satan versus God. And funnily enough, like thinking about that in the Bible and everything, Jesus was the middle. Jesus was the middle ground. That's why the story, Jesus' story, was in the middle of the Bible. Because Jesus was spoken about both at the end of the Old Testament and then in the beginning of the New Testament. And so he kind of took the middle. And if you have read the Bible at all, you'll know that Jesus was not a perfect man. He got angry for sure. He had his temptations for sure. And this reminds me too, because another thing, I don't remember if this was part 1 or part 2 of that interview I watched last night, but what Jordan Peterson mentioned too, because he did bring up the Bible as well, because he studies a lot of like Western religion. And he brought up the scene in the Bible where Jesus is out in the wilderness and he's tempted by the devil, in the sense of saying, oh, I could give you the world, right? I could give you everything you could ever want, all the money, all the jewels, everything, all the power. And Jesus basically denied him and was like, no, because he knew there was something better than that, right? And what Jordan Peterson mentioned when he was talking about that story was just, he was, in that moment, he was able to face his shadow. That was a story of showing you him facing his shadow, because again, he wasn't perfect. He was able to face his shadow, and from there, he was able to heal that and then ascend, right? Or transcend the shadow work, or transcend the bullshit, whatever you want to call it. And so essentially, it's like everything I've ever studied, whatever religion, whatever occult belief it was, has always come down to the same kind of ideas of, you have this dark part of you that's being ignored. And when you ignore it, it creates chaos. Like, essentially, that's what happens. It really does. I mean, it was like, he also brought up just anybody who's ever been an oppressor, anybody who's ever been a tyrant or whatever. It stems from them originally feeling oppressed and feeling weak and feeling angry. And it's like you suppress that for so long, it explodes, it becomes its own entity. And then you have these rulers that come about who are tyrants, who want to control everything. And that's essentially and it's like, you have to face that you're able to become that. You are able to become just as ugly as some of the most ugly people we've seen in our history. You're just as capable of doing some of the most damage that these people have also done. Because we all have that built in within us. We all have that ego. We all have that dark side. We all have that part of us that's wounded. And if you don't tend to those woundings, it's like if you just throw that wounded kid into a dungeon, you haven't attended to their wounds with bandages and cleaning out the wounds and things like that, and you just threw them in there, those wounds are going to just fester. They're not going to heal. They're just going to fester and get infected and get all pussy and green and nasty. Ugh. Creates its own monster. You create your own Frankenstein. So shadow work is so important. Dealing with your wounded self is so important. And so I want my next video, I don't know if it'll be tomorrow. I don't want to promise and say it'll be tomorrow, but it'll either be tomorrow or next week, where I want to share some of the books that have helped me the most with dealing with that wounded child that I threw in the dungeon. Because again, to me, it's not enough to deal with how you feel in the moment, because if you're not dealing with where that feeling stems from, it's like you're just putting the Band-Aid on the wound and saying, okay, I dealt with it. But it's like, no, you didn't, because that feeling came from somewhere. You felt rejected because there was a point in time early in life where you felt rejected, and this story was created. And you've been telling yourself that same story. And so every time that buttons push, that story comes alive. And even if you deal with it in the moment and you're able to quiet yourself down, you're still just suppressing that wounded child. And you're just adding more locks to that dungeon door, trying to make sure that they can't come out. And you have to go into that original root. You have to get to the root of it. If you don't, then nothing changes. You're just forever going to be trying to do damage controls. Like, you become the PR person who's constantly just trying to do damage control and keep yourself from acting out of pocket or acting out of character. That's essentially what you become when you don't deal with it. And it becomes an exhausting job. You become exhausted trying to keep up this facade of this perfect person who never gets angry and who's unshakable and who's centered. You're not centered. You have to deal with the darkness first before you can become centered, because then you hit the point where if something does trigger you, you don't respond to it because you understand where that trigger comes from. That's what healing is, you know? Healing is dealing with those triggers so that, say that situation happens again, it really doesn't affect you. And you don't have to go do PR damage control and convincing yourself not to be angry. You won't be angry. You know what I mean? So there's a difference between faking like you're not angry and actually not being angry or not being agitated or just not being stirred. There's a difference. And so a lot of us are walking around being PR managers, trying to control our feelings and control ourselves. We become so rigid. Like, no wonder why a lot of us get like arthritis and we shrivel up as we get old, because we're trying so hard to like restrict that you can't grow. When you restrict something, it cannot grow. I mean, think about when you have bushes and things outside and people want them to stay a certain size and in a certain shape, they restrict it so that it cannot go beyond those boundaries. And then if it does, what do? They cut it, right? So it stays a certain shape. And essentially that's what you're doing to that wounded part of you. You're suppressing it. You're keeping it from being able to grow. And so that then affects you physically. And so you get to a point where you've lived 60, 70 years and you haven't allowed yourself to grow beyond that 7-year-old mindset. And your body starts to weaken and you live out the rest of your life like this old shriveled up thing. You don't have to become old and shriveled up. Like, yeah, you're going to age because that's what the human body does, but you don't have to be shriveled up and in pain and with brittle bones. You can be totally healthy. So when you don't deal with the 7-year-old mentality that you have, it's going to reflect in your body. And it's almost like, it's crazy because you think about it. You start out small as a child and you end up small as you get older, as a child still, because you never surpass that age of 7. And the only way you do is doing that shadow work. So that means, again, accepting and embracing that dark side of you. If you go off on somebody, don't go and make yourself feel guilty for going off on somebody or for feeling attacked. You have to accept in that moment that that's how you felt and say, you know what, I had a right to feel the way that I feel. And it's not because you're blaming the other person. Again, it's saying it's you coming from a place of understanding that there is some story within you that you've yet to discover, where every time a similar kind of situation happens, that story is told again in your mind and you then act out that same story over and over and over. Again, it's not about blaming someone else and putting guilt on someone else and saying, well, they did it, they made me feel that way. It's about, feel your feelings for about 5-10 minutes, but then say, hey, okay, why am I feeling that way? But most of us don't want to face that. Like, we don't want to actually question ourselves and why, because sometimes it's painful. And in that case, maybe you need a therapist, or somebody to talk to, depending on what level of pain that wound may cause. Get the help you need in that case for sure. But a lot of it can be done on your own. A lot of it is self-work. That's my experience. Nothing is too hard for you to deal with when you're ready to just face it. And when you face it, again, that's that sweet spot. So, again, bringing that story of me and my dogs, I still have moments like this morning. my bigger dog, Luna, wasn't listening. She was so focused on another dog. And I was triggered and I was frustrated and I yelled at her to get her to do what I wanted her to do. And immediately, like, you could see in her eyes, like, oh, mommy yelled at me. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, like her, because dogs are just, they're freaking awesome. Like, it doesn't matter how much you yell at them, you know, or if you get upset with them, they're going to love you regardless, right? And so, again, it was another moment where I was triggered. And it's kind of like I had to become aware in that moment because I've been doing the work in that area and becoming aware in the moment and saying, okay, I'm feeling this way because of X, Y, Z. And saying, I understand why I feel that way. I'm healing, you know. And that's something I've been saying so much the last week, is giving yourself space and time to heal. Because even when you become aware of something, it doesn't mean you're not going to still be triggered. Because that's just the first part. Is like you know, like, you accept and you embrace and you get to the understanding and everything. You're still going to get triggered and you're still going to react. Because again, it's something I've mentioned all week. And I guess this is just that message of the week, is your brain has been wired to respond a certain way. And until you change those neural pathways, you're still going to respond the same way. It's just now you're aware of doing it. So now you see yourself doing it and responding in the same way. And you're able to choose something different. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, you're not going to choose the different path. You're still going to go down the same route. And you have to be willing to accept that that's okay, because you've been suppressing this part of yourself for so long, you know, that it's angry, it's raging. It's like a raging bull. You can't calm down a bull that's raging. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just be like, oh, okay, calm down, bull. Like, no, it's going to be hopping around trying to gore things and poke its freaking horns into stuff and destroy things, because it's been teased. You know, it's been whipped, it's been hit, it's been beaten up, and now it wants to have vengeance. And so you have to be able to give that inner child, that wounded part of you, time to be able to kind of settle down. It's like releasing the top and letting the steam come out, right? It's like when I cook with my pressure cooker. When that timer goes off and I know there's a bunch of steam built up in that pressure cooker, I have to flick the little switch so that the steam can start to come out. But I can't open the top and look at the food until the steams come out, you know? So it's kind of like, sometimes you're going to get triggered, maybe quite a few times, and you'll be aware of it. And you will feel like you have no control and you can't change the situation and you can't make a different decision, because that steam is still being released. You know? And then once the steam is released, you can take the top off of the pressure cooker and look and see how yummy your food is and stuff. And that's when you can really begin to do the work. Ooh, hi, Reagan. I hope I'm saying your name right. Hi, Shanae. Thanks for talking about such a great topic. You're welcome. Shoot. I feel like I've been repeating myself all week. It's so weird, but it's just the experiences that I keep experiencing all week, the way that I've been getting triggered all week. The things I've been coming across, whether it's me reading or watching a video, and it just causes me to think, which causes me to become more aware, which causes me to understand myself more. And then I'm like, you know, I'm just going to go share it. Because that was one thing that I did finally change. So this is an example too of how long it can take you to finally choose a different path. So for me, earlier this week, I talked about how I decided I wanted to kind of take my teacher hat off, in the sense of I'm not going to try to make courses and stuff anymore, because it was me acting out of a need to kind of protect myself and create this facade that just was not making me happy. And I was hoarding so much information. And I was like, one of the things I wanted to do was just start sharing, you know, sharing books, sharing articles, sharing videos, whatever I came across. And that's something that I've continued to do. And it feels really good, but it took me years to finally change course. You know, I would get triggered all the time. And I would be aware, like I would be aware, because there would be months again where I would disappear from YouTube and stuff. And I would just kind of feel like, what am I doing? This isn't making me happy. Like, why am I hoarding so much information? Why do I feel like I have to create this course? You know, these courses are never complete. I'm always trying to add to them and perfect them. And it feels like a struggle. And internally, I always understood that if something feels like a struggle, it's because it's not meant for you. That's not the path for you, you know? And I would know that. So it was like I was becoming aware, but that steam was still releasing. And it wasn't literally until this month that I was able to change course, because it was kind of like the raging bull was able to calm down a bit. and say, oh, okay, I don't have to be so angry anymore. I don't have to do things this way anymore. I can actually let go. So that's just one example, like personally in my life, where it took me years before I was able to actually let go fully and change direction. And now, when I am triggered in a sense, so when I do like come across somebody creating a chorus and I have that brief moment where I'm like, oh man, I could create a chorus. I'm like so mentally aware in that moment, like, no, that's not what I desire to do. That's not something that I want for myself. And I'm able to just keep going down this path I'm going down, because every time I get on here and I speak with you guys and I'm sharing what I'm experiencing and what's triggering me, or how I've grown, or how I'm healing, or what I've realized, even if it's me saying the same thing in different ways all week, it feels so good. Like it's been a while since I felt like I'm doing what I actually want. And this is the way that I want my life to be. And, again, it took me years, at least 2 to 3 years to get to this point where I'm like, change course. And it was just just an instant decision. And I haven't diverted back, but it took time. So I will always say, give yourself time and give yourself the space and the patience to heal, because it is totally necessary if you really want to heal. Otherwise, again, you're just going to become that PR person who's just like, oh shit, we done messed up right here. Let's try to cover it up a little bit. You know what I mean? I think my steam was let out last night with a friend discussing our past. What you said earlier about how we can handle anything if we're truly ready. Yeah, it does sting. Yep. You have to be ready to face it. And oftentimes that readiness does come after a heated or a passionate moment. Like, I think for me, like with my dogs, I had one day where, I was so angry. I was throwing stuff in the house. I started crying, and I was just like crying and telling my husband how I felt so like unappreciated and unloved and blah, 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 blah. And then I started talking about my childhood. And that's how I knew I was having one of those moments again, where the steam was really just being released and I was no longer suppressing. And I haven't had a moment like that in over 3 weeks. And so again, for me, it was almost like every 3 weeks, like on the dot, it was like, oh, Shanae's about to crack. Shanae's about to crack. But when I finally let myself release and just like no shame in it, and I just let myself cry, I let myself yell, I let myself just be angry, much better. Much, much, much better. And you have to just be willing to accept that. Sometimes you gotta do that. Sometimes you gotta just, you have to. That's like a part of the healing process. It's a huge part. And being able to do it and accept that it happened, instead of feeling like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I'm embarrassed. I feel ashamed that I let myself get to that point. No, you have to let yourself get to that point. You have to let yourself get angry and feel it and actually release it. Otherwise, you hold it in your body takes it on as toxic waste, and that manifests in a variety of ways and a variety of sicknesses and illnesses that your body will then begin to show you and manifest, so that you can see that there is something wrong that you have to deal with. And so that's why I know, like, I really want that next video I do to be about the books that I've read that have really helped make that shift, because those books allowed me to see how my body was at the point where it was telling me, like, something is wrong, and you are holding these feelings, you are holding these things in, and in the prison of it's like your body has become a prison for these feelings, and your body can't withstand it anymore. It tries its best to create balance and to stay healthy, but it hits a point where you just go beyond and above because you've suppressed so much that it's just in pain. So, and again, it manifests in many ways. Like, one of the biggest ways for me was being overweight. And still, even like, there's still some pounds that I want to shed at this point. And it's almost like there's still some things that are being held, but as I release more and more, I just feel myself lighter and lighter and lighter. So yeah, that'll definitely be the next video. And then I know also I was asked, and I've been asked this a lot is how I did lose a lot of the weight I did, because I've lost around 40 pounds now, and I want to say, where am I? I want to lose about 15 to 20 more, because I am short. And I want to be at my best health. And I know that those last like 10 to 15, 20 pounds tend to be the hardest to lose. And I realize that I don't want it to be a struggle where I'm like pushing myself to exhaustion with working out and dieting and stuff like that. And I recognize that a huge part of the reason I lost weight was dealing with some of the emotional stuff. So that'll be its own video that I do as well, because that's something I've been approached with a lot, as far as how I was able to lose the weight. So in that video, I'll be talking about the physical stuff I did do, as far as what I was eating and if I was exercising and stuff, which, shocker, I really didn't exercise at all, pretty much. I think I had maybe okay, I've been in Texas for 5 years. And since then, I've been trying to lose this weight. But I would say out of the 4 to 5 years I've been here, maybe a year of it I did exercise, like extraneous exercise. Like, yeah, I walk my dogs. I do basic movements and stuff like that. But as far as like setting time aside and actually working out hard in the gym, so that wasn't a huge component of my weight loss. And neither was diet, to be honest. So a lot of it was internal stuff. But again, when I do that video, I will share the physical things I did do, because I do feel that they were triggers and catalysts to help me. But a lot of it was mental and spiritual work. And it was not me sitting in a mirror or trying to manifest being skinny by speaking into existence me being skinny. It wasn't that. It was a lot of just inner work. So yeah, those will be 2 videos that will be coming out. Again, I don't know if I'll be live tomorrow or not, but if I am, then it'll definitely be me most likely talking about books. I can't be 100% because sometimes I get real inspired and I just want to come and share an experience. But those are definitely 2 videos that I want to have out to you guys within the next week or two, as far as the top books that I would recommend, and then how I've been able to lose so much weight and keep it off, because I haven't gained any of it back. So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I was able to paint my toes. They're beautiful. This color, OPI, Positive Vibes Only, which is just, again, so ironic, seeing that this was all about shadow work and embracing your dark side and your negativity, your negative vibes only. I was going to paint my fingernails, but they'll just get messed up. So yeah, nice girl chats, or boy chat if you're watching as a man or watching the replay later. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you guys for commenting. I love seeing your comments. I love chatting with you guys back and forth. It feels so much better than me just sitting in front of a camera and just talking, and there's no like feedback until after I posted it. Like, I just love having the like real time feedback. Makes me so happy. So anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye. And love you too, Addie. Love you too.